Hey everyone, and welcome. We are so very happy to have you here on site and online. My name is Emma Samra, and I'm an assistant professor here at Lund University and at the Center for Retail Research. The Center for Retail Research is an interdisciplinary research center, and we come from different backgrounds. So we are working together with people from the Faculty of Social Sciences, the School of Economics and Management, and the Faculty of Engineering. This seminar is the second one in a series where we talk about the future of consumption. And today we are going to focus on consumer well-being, and this is also part of a book project that we are working on that's going to be published later on in 2023. I'm not going to say much more detail about all of these things, but if you want to have more information, there will be a web address later on in the end of the presentation where you can visit the website for the center. Today we have a moderator, and it's Katarina Grafman, and I'm going to give the word to you now so you can continue. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Emma. Very welcome again to this seminar, and it will be a very full morning, so I think it will be very interesting for all of you here and also online. So I think maybe I should just say who I am. I'm a doctor in cultural anthropology from Uppsala University, also in Sweden, of course. And my main focus areas are consumer culture and media consumption. And I have also been very interested in young people and also the health issues of young people today. That is very connected to social media, I would say. So I am very glad to be here and to lead this discussion today. And the morning will have 4 presentations, and then we will have a panel discussion with all the researchers. Oh, my Swinglish is not very good all the time. I really encourage you to ask questions, and just stick your hand up if you are here in the audience, or just write it down. Because this is a possibility for you to actually be part of the discussion today and ask your questions. So please do that. And if your question is not coming up, it's because it's so many questions, so we have to make some kind of, to look through the questions. So, but maybe we can look through the questions after and see, and come back to you in that way. So I think we should start off with the first presentation. Alisa Minina, you are Assistant Professor of Marketing from IPAG School of Business, and your presentation is digitalization of health issues in social media.
Digitalization of mental health, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you so very much, everyone. So lovely to see you. Okay, so shall we wait for this to happen? Oh my God, like we live in the future. I can push the button and everything happens. So, okay, just a quick introduction. Hi everyone, my name is Alisa. I currently live in Paris. I'm an assistant professor of marketing at IPAG Business School. I did my PhD at Stockholm University, so I've lived in Sweden for 7 years now. After 4 years in France, I forgot almost all my Swedish, but I still understand quite a lot. And I wanted to talk to you today about my project, my ongoing project on digitalization of mental health services. So what is it about? Basically, we see that the world is changing, right? And the human-to-human communication is being increasingly replaced to human technology communication, or for example, human communication with technology. And we can see that, for example, you see Replica, the value proposition of this artificial intelligence chatbot, the AI companion who cares, always here to listen and talk, always on your side. So basically what happens here, you talk to this chatbot, it learns your patterns, and eventually it can grow into being your friend, or now they have a new update, a romantic partner. So all of it is incredibly interesting. And of course, the psychology and the psychotherapy, it's such a thing, it's such a profession, such a discipline where the therapeutic relationship is very important, the human relationship between a client and the therapist. So my original idea was to investigate what happens to the therapeutic relationship when this relationship gets digitalized, but later it grew into a more overarching idea of mapping the digital mental health services servicescape. So first of all, I'm going to give you a little introduction in terms of context. So everywhere in the world, especially here in the European Union, the governments and the publics are focusing a lot on digitalization. So when we read the documents of Euro Commission, so these beautiful plans that they have for the next 10 years, that may or may not come true, but they have announced that now we have the digital decade and they have certain targets to achieve by 2030. Among those targets are digitalization of the healthcare system, and a massive investment is going into this domain. So digitalization of healthcare, digitalization of public services, basically digitalization of everything. So they're trying to create this pan-European database. And since 2020, a lot of funding is going into development of mobile health apps. And I'm going to show you some stats right now that will give you a more or less reasonable picture of what's going on. So first of all, of course, mental health is a very important issue, and now we have a mental health month. You might have heard about this. So, for example, many mental health platforms are becoming free for the month of May in honor of spreading the awareness of mental health. So we can see that mental health is a very burning issue. So share of adults with a risk of depression in Europe between 2020 and 2021. And of course, we know that there is a lot of structural factors contributing to this. So we had the pandemic, we had the lockdowns in multiple countries. Now we have the war. No one knows what happens next. Some people are joking about what's next, Godzilla, aliens, but these jokes are like half funny, half scary. So people are struggling. People are struggling with depression. People are struggling with anxiety. Not everyone has enough money to access the mental health services. So what are we going to do here? So take a look at the healthcare providers. The healthcare providers are moving towards digitalization, towards telehealth, towards video consultations. And we see that Nordics are leading here. Spain is in the second place. Netherlands, so I don't see France here, so I guess France is part of the other, but France is still a very relational culture where, we like to visit each other and talk. But even France now has telehealth services developing, so especially during the pandemic when we had lockdowns after lockdowns after lockdowns, we needed to do this. So the fitness and well-being sector is booming. And when I say fitness, I don't say just fitness and gym. So most of the fitness platforms now incorporate mental health, meditation parts. So here you can see the graph. So unfortunately, the slide has eaten like part of my legend. So the blue is the fitness, the dark blue is meditation, the like gray pinkish, depending on which color you see here, is nutrition. And of course, this is Statista. This is the Eurocall. So they are trying to make predictions, but the predictions look quite ambitious that the whole market is going to double by 2026, which is 4 years from now. Average revenue per user by segment, we can see that it's growing as well, because most of the apps, they operate the subscription-based platform. Right, so they are trying to get subscriptions. And here, finally, you see a number of popular apps like Calm, Headspace, Meditopia, and you can see that also their revenues have been growing significantly. So you can find all this data. It's publicly available on Statista if you have subscription. So very, very interesting. So they have lots of data. And finally, telemedicine is very funded, but again, I'm just talking about the context, so let's move to the project. I'm trying to keep the timing. So the focus of this project is on consumer well-being and digital mental health, but before we move forward, let's try to define, so what is well-being? And well-being is a notoriously fluffy concept. So I have decided to adopt the definition of well-being from this article by Dodge and co-authors, which is literally named, it is hard to define what is well-being. So, but I really like the definition. So stable well-being is when individuals have the psychological, mental, right, social and physical resources they need to meet a particular psychological, social, and or physical challenge. So it's very nice, very neat breakdown, right? In consumer research, in marketing specifically, we have transformative service research that identifies more, in more detail, more dimensions of consumer well-being, right? So it can be the physical health, mental health, financial well-being, the lack of structural factors that can harm consumer well-being. So here we are going to focus, of course, on the mental health. And I'm not going to talk much in detail through what helps well-being or what harms well-being. There is tons of research on this. So here are some examples, right? That well-being can be about being rather than having. It can be about consumer deceleration, slowing down, escaping the speed culture, as Katarina Husseman and Jana Eckhart call it. It can be about having social support groups, right? So being with the society, not participating in the rat race, having time to slow down is increasing our well-being or facilitating our well-being, right? So let's try not to be very measury here. And of course, some barriers to well-being, the technology addiction, replacing your human connections by internet, you know, so all the brave new world of the future, escaping the reality can be a barrier to well-being. So consumerism, for example. So what is digital mental health? Digital mental health can be a tool that supports psychological well-being of consumers, right? So it can be, in psychiatry literature, it is defined as any application of digital health technology for mental health assessment, support, prevention, and treatment. This is a very overarching umbrella term, and later we will see that things are a little bit more complicated here because it's not, it's very hard to put everything that's happening there under one umbrella term. So mental health apps basically have double benefits as claimed again by the literature in psychiatry and mental health. So they reduce strain on mental health services, they can improve patient well-being, and they can increase access for underrepresented groups, again, because not everyone has enough money for, you know, their private analyst. So let's see what has been identified so far as multiple ethical issues in online psychotherapy. So the research has been booming. Again, unfortunately, not in marketing and consumer research, but in mental health and medical literature in the last 2-3 years. So among the advantages, what is mentioned is, of course, the accessibility, the enhanced communication and therapy benefits, advantages related to specific client characteristics. So, for example, you have a client who lives in a small village and they don't have access to a specific, for example, CBT or Gestalt or psychoanalytical professional. Convenience. So nothing really new here, right? But at the same time, we do have certain disadvantages, or I would call them ethical concerns, because what happens to privacy, confidentiality, and security, right? We do have the therapeutic secrecy, but what happens when your therapist is, for example, a chatbot, a subscription-based chatbot that sends all the information from your conversations to Google Analytics? This is where we are entering the gray zone, and this is where this is not very regulated, right? Therapist competence and need for special training. So yes, the therapists are trained in face-to-face communication, but do we have enough special trainings for the professionals to engage in digital communication? Technology issues, you know, we lose the sound, we lose the video. Insufficient research on efficiency, unfortunately, right? So psychotherapy, as let's say talk therapy in itself, has been challenged multiple times when it comes to efficiency. So we do have CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy, and these guys have been managing to publish quite a lot of beautiful papers proving the effectiveness of this type of therapy. But when we go to existential, when we go to Gestalt, when we go to psychoanalysis, we mostly work on a case-by-case basis. So there is not that many publications that would, let's say, prove to the, like, scientifically prove, right, the effectiveness of treatment, because these treatments are more prolonged. So CBT, you can have some targets that you achieve in 10 sessions. So, and of course, the unregulated space of mental health services that sometimes can damage the image of profession, and this is what multiple specialists are complaining about, that because the space is so unregulated, because multiple people are starting to provide consultations online, then the consumers don't trust therapists anymore because they don't know who is professional, who is less professional. So let's reimagine digital mental health services as a service ecosystem, right? So the concept of service ecosystem comes from the service dominant logic, and we can define it as a system of interdependent market actors who basically interact with each other. They participate in market exchange and they create value together, right? So another question, what is value? So there are multiple definitions of value, multiple concepts of value. It's not just use value, right? Value can be symbolic, value can be social. Value is almost as fluffy a concept as a well-being, but let's go on here. So what about transformative value? So transformative service research talks to us about this ideal of transformative value or an uplifting change in consumer well-being that can happen when consumers interact with services. And digital mental health services can be technically a very good space for consumers to engage with services in chasing this beautiful and elusive transformative value. So you can imagine the service ecosystem as such. So Blocker and Barriers from transformative service research were very much inspired by Giddens and his theory of structuration. So we have an ecosystem of market actors. We have the service design, the value propositions, the services, the apps. We have the society, the social structures, so right, things, how they should be done, the usual practices of things. We have humans who are trying to figure it all out, so what is called resource integration and service dominant logic, and we have service practices, so what people do with the services, and in the space in between the offerings, the practices, the societal rules and norms, and the humans, the value creation happens. So what is happening in this project? Again, the main question is, how is value created in digital mental health services? And stage one that I would like to share with you today is mapping the main market actors. So who are the service providers, right? And analyzing the service design and the value propositions. So stage two and stage three that are also ongoing, analyzing the profiles, discursive strategies, and value proposition of online mental health influencers who are also very much claim their place as service providers. And finally, interviewing human agents, practitioners, so influencers and psychotherapists, and consumers with a focus on service practices and value discourse. So the data analysis is very interpretive, iterative, going back between the data and the literature. And of course, our favorite, theoretical coding, and the rhetorical analysis of the discursive strategies of value propositions. So what exactly is being offered here? So here you can take a look at the inclusion and exclusion criteria that helps in this project, that was helping me map which platforms I would analyze and which I wouldn't. So of course, I'm mostly focusing on the publicly available platforms and services that are searchable on Google Play Store. When it comes to mental health influencers and online communities, of course, it's open public profiles, it's open communities, because you cannot analyze private groups. This is not permitted. Oriented to general target audience and address issues of mental health, mental well-being, or specific clinical conditions like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, other mood disorders, phobias, and so on. So exclusion criteria, of course, not publicly available, by prescription only, platforms I don't analyze, web version only. So in order to kind of limit the scope, I'm focusing on whatever is available on mobile, so no private profiles. Also, again, my interest is more in the general audience targets and services. So I'm excluding for this project the specific niche demographic orientation, like, for example, war veterans, children, pregnant women, because they have very, very specific value propositions. And I also exclude the apps and the services with the primary focus on, for example, physical fitness or nutrition with no significant attention paid to psychological well-being. So these platforms need to be focused on the well-being. So what do we see here? In general, the first insights, the first preliminary insights, it is a huge, crowded, and hyper-competitive market because, you know, all these suggestions of how you can become a better version of yourself are kind of like crawling onto you from everywhere, you know, everywhere you go. From consumption to social media to all these quantification apps that promise you that if you meditate every day, you will be more balanced and more happy, you know, and people will like you. It's everywhere. And we have multiple human, non-human, and hybrid actors and value propositions. And another interesting thing that leads to multiple legal problems is that most of these things, right, we have digitalization, globalization, all these apps are globally available, deterritorialized, and with very limited local specifics. So, for example, on Instagram, we have multiple psychologists and psychotherapists. In France, you have a prison term of 1 year and 45,000 euros fine for claiming to be a psychologist if you are not legally a psychologist, right? But that is in France. What if you are not based in France, right? You're in another country that doesn't have the same kind of legislation, and you went to a 2-week course on how to become a psychologist, and suddenly you're a life coach and you start consulting people and you say that you are, for example, an energy healing psychologist. Nothing happens to you. So it's very deregulated and people have access to it from everywhere. So of course the jurisdiction here is very unresolved. So the non-clinical sector specifically is largely unregulated because on the psychotherapeutical platforms, of course, they check the credentials, but not on social media. And another very, very interesting thing that we see, especially in the English-speaking sector, is the hybridization of clinical and new age discourse. Because if you take a look at the most popular, some of the most popular social media psychotherapists who are, I would say, legit psychotherapists. So the holistic psychologist, Dr. Nicole LaPera, you have a lot of hybridization of clinical and new age discourse. And sometimes it is extremely hard among this tsunami of inspirational quotes to determine who is an actual expert and who is an inspirational quote enthusiast, right? And of course, another problem that we see in the online platforms is the Uberization of therapeutic relationships, right? So how is the therapeutic relationship originally supposed to look like? You have a prolonged engagement between the therapist and the client. The therapist learns the client. You engage for, let's say, 10, 15, 20 sessions, so multiple years if it's Gestalt therapy or psychoanalysis. Now we have value propositions. You have a therapist in your pocket. You know, it's like a Tinder for psychotherapists. So you can find one, you have a consultation, you jump to another one, and then to another one, and then to another one. And of course, you can do the same thing offline. But it's much harder. So let's take a look at the digital mental services landscape, the initial mapping. So there are many, many more platforms here. In order not to overcrowd this space, I have selected a few examples. So it's kind of a 2x2 situation here, but here you have all the offerings with the main focus on human interaction. Here, I mean, artificial intelligence, it's a very fancy term. I would call it non-human, so, or non-direct human interaction, right? Here you have the platforms focused on general well-being, and here you have the platforms with more clinical application. So you see that the general well-being artificial intelligence sector is taken by the meditation apps and platforms that promise to, let's say, increase your general well-being. We have Petit Bambou, the French meditation app. We have Calm. We have, of course, the Headspace. Here I also put all the trackers, so the measurable trackers like Belly Beat, the Oura Ring, the Fitbit. So they are about fitness, but at the same time, they have a huge portion of their service dedicated to breathing exercises, meditation, connecting your, for example, Bellabit talks about cardiac coherence, your heart rate and your breathing, and they offer you breathing exercises in order to become more coherent. Here you have the therapy chatbots, here you have the platforms, the therapy platforms, and here you have the Wild Wild West. So Emma is showing me the 5 minutes thing, so I need to be very, very quick here. So the self-care valley, the AI platforms of well-being. You have the meditation apps, fitness apps, Headspace, Meditopia, Calm. So they promise self-care, mental balance, stress management, in general, the optimal performance. So be the better version of you. Mostly they're freemium, subscription-based, and they're kind of like seemingly self-guided, but very, very nudgy. And like if you don't subscribe for premium version, you get a reminder 10 times a day. So I'm not sure how calm you can be with Calm if it keeps harassing you to buy its premium version. And of course, it's accessible and convenient, but again, the aggressive nudge tactics are a bit questionable. And of course, the privacy, your demographic data goes to Google, whether you want it or not. Artificial intelligence, non-human clinical apps, what I call the blue pill, because it helps you kind of manage your symptoms and continue functioning in the matrix. So here you can see the conversation, my conversation with the robots. Hey Alisa, I'm Wise, I'm an AI penguin you can chat with about your emotions and thoughts. So I'm asking the penguin, how do you help? And they start explaining, so depending on your challenges, if you're anxious, we can do breathing exercises, we can do this. Next thing I asked, Wise, do you sell my data to third parties? And then it answers, you know, this like canned response. Your data is protected in accordance with our privacy guidelines. You can go on our website and read them. And of course, I go on their website and I read them. And basically, they say that they can change the privacy notice anytime they want. And when it's in their legal interest, all the conversation data can go to third parties if it's in the interest of the company. So it's all very, you know, legalese. It's all very like written, very fluffy, like incomprehensible way. But you need to learn to read between the lines in order to understand that your data is absolutely not protected here. So everything you tell this chat robot about your fears, about your symptoms, will eventually can be sold to advertisers. And that is a very crucial thing that we need to understand here. So we have here in the sector the therapy chatbots, screening and diagnostic apps, you have all the robots, you have the depression test, anxiety test, mental health tests, all the symptom management and tracking apps that are, of course, freemium subscription-based, or they have one-time payments, and kind of exactly the same advantages, disadvantages here as the other ones, with a lot of focus on like privacy here becomes a really serious issue. The happiness market, the Wild Wild West, the human well-being, online communities, mental health influencers, and experts. So anyone who decides to be an expert and teach you how to live. You have online communities like Reddit, you have the online psychologists. Some of them are professional, some of them are not, right? So value propositions, anything you want. Support, empowerment, self-improvement, inspiration. They monetize their influence through educational programs, books, podcasts, anything. So it's much more interactive. You interact with humans, you build communities, you build these hubs around the personal brands like Deepak Chopra, and of course, it's very accessible. It's destigmatizing mental health issues, but because we don't have any entry barriers for market actors, we don't have any qualification and expertise control. Coming back, globalization, right? So no legal jurisdiction. It is extremely hard for an uninformed consumer who doesn't have a background in psychology or psychotherapy to understand what is exactly going on. So which can manifest as, again, the professionals complain to the damage to the image of profession, and of course, a lot of, I don't like the term misinformation, right, but harmful information or advice, because any mental health influencer can kind of come up with their own suggestion, you know, that you need, I don't know, go out in the street and like scream at people and it will make you feel better. And basically you will believe them if they have enough followers. And that is a very, let's say, I wouldn't say disturbing, but awareness kind of building, alertness building fact here. And finally, we have the therapy room, you know, the classical human clinical online platforms, online aggregator platforms that suggest to connect the patients and therapists. the telemedicine platforms, either independent, like for example, CRE or CARE, or online practitioners, independent or working for the health centers, and this is probably the safest option, the most regulated option in your country or in each particular country. And here we have the monsters like the BetterHelp and Talkspace, really big platforms available in multiple countries. We have the Swedish CRE, we have the Levy, which is the French extension of CRE, we have CARE, Wellnight, UPER, and basically what they say is these are the Uberization platforms, accessible and affordable therapy whenever you want, wherever you want. So, and of course, it's one-on-one consultations, the classic therapy, the therapy groups, you can choose between different types. You pay per consultation or you can pay a subscription. And of course here, the expertise is verified, it's very accessible, it costs peanuts compared to what you would pay for a private face-to-face psychotherapist. Some platforms are covered by insurance, but of course there are issues raised in psychiatry literature regarding the efficiency of help, regarding the recognition of extreme cases. For example, if a person is on the brink of doing something, how efficient is online therapy going to be compared to the face-to-face therapy, and the liquidization of relationships in general. So this type of, as I said, Tinder for therapists. So let's sum it up. Basically, so what, right? Again, it's a very ongoing project, so that's why an analysis is still very mappy and descriptive and not very theorized. But we can see that it's not a unified landscape. Digital mental health is an umbrella term for multiple human and non-human actors with their own specifics, varying degrees of agency and rules of engagement. And of course, we need to understand the different relationship logics and processes that are going on there. So I would like to finish up by saying that the technology is advancing much faster than the regulatory space. And of course, it raises important legal and ethical concerns that need to be studied further. So I wanted to finish with a little breathing exercise, if we can, just for you to experience, the chill and the zen. It's on YouTube, so it's like we need to start the video here. Does it work? It's like 53 seconds. No, I think it's, We live in the future. You can just put the mouse on the, yes, and start the video, yeah. Oh, no. Let's go back, yes. It was a good idea. Okay, you can take your breathing exercise later. So that illustrates our technology living in the future situation that, you can expect a lot of relief from your digital mental health therapist, but sometimes the video just doesn't work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alisa.
Thank you.
You were good at keeping the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I have a lot of questions because I think this is so interesting, especially when it comes to how we as consumers actually are feeling more and more bad in today's society. Yes. I would like just to ask you around the definition of health, because you talked about that in the beginning, and I think that is really important to understand what is health, also in a cultural perspective, I think, because the apps, like you said, are everywhere. Yes. And they are maybe not adjusted to different cultural contexts and what kind of health definitions they have in different cultures. Are you looking into this in the research? Or?
So at this moment, I'm looking into the definitions of well-being, and I like this definition of being able to face challenges, your day-to-day challenges, be it physical, mental, or for example, financial. In no way I'm a health expert. So I am a psychologist by first education. That's what motivated my kind of interest for this project. But I'm not a clinical psychologist. So I would be very careful in giving you the definition of health on the spot. But if I would provide my own definition as a cultural understanding, I would say that health is whatever is normalized in a specific culture at a specific time as health.
So can you see anything in your research? I know that Sofia also will talk later about this, but can you see any connections when you have all this growth in apps and all the healthcare systems in social media and on the internet that actually people are feeling
Absolutely. What
more
I
bad?
see is that the different, I would say the different styles of psychotherapy are popular in different countries. So for example, the acceptance and commitment therapy would be more popular in certain countries, like in the Western countries, and the focus is a lot on accepting yourself. But in some other countries, when we lean towards the East, for example, Eastern Europe, the more Stoicism-inspired therapy methods are more popular. So something that is focused on overcoming and bettering. And this is this constant balance that happens between accepting yourself and becoming your better self. And of course, now in this marketplace, this whole, like all of this thing clashes and you have everything. So as I said, it's a market of happiness. So anyone can go online and find a therapist whose style will be specifically more appropriate for the specific client. But it's also very confusing.
Yes, because you talked about Tinder for psychotherapists.
Tinder for psychotherapists.
And when you look at what Tinder makes to love and relationships, would you say, can you see the same kind of things when you're looking how
Yes.
people use, you know, different psychotherapists?
I think my vision may be a little bit biased because my last project was on Tinder. So
I know.
Yes. We have explored what happens to value creation and value destruction in dating apps and how these conflicting concepts of value between people can lead to the decrease in well-being and, you know, the dissatisfaction, frustration, depression, all this horrible things. So I'm using this metaphor for psychotherapy, but of course I think that psychotherapy is a much more ethical field. You do not have malicious psychotherapists who intend to harm the clients like you would have, for example, on Tinder, where people are facing multiple abusive behaviors. So of course I would say that the therapy space is much more regulated. But you do have conflicting notions of value, you do have conflicting understandings of what a good therapy is. So someone needs a therapist who listens, and someone needs this like authoritative style therapist who tells you what to do.
No, because I thought, you know, this kind of swiping, you know,
Yes.
and also in the relationships, and that you actually, because it's quite difficult for people who are feeling bad to find someone who is,
Yes.
they think that they could trust. So can you see the same kind of behavior? It's even more difficult to find something that actually is good for you.
I think here the consumer is much less vulnerable because in Tinder, both parties are very vulnerable to abusive behaviors on the other side. Here we have the therapists who are constrained by the professional ethics, and we have the consumers who can change therapists like gloves.
Yeah.
So I think for therapists, it might be a less comfortable situation compared to the in-person treatment when you have a committed patient. And of course, they might experience frustration when the therapy process gets interrupted and the patient goes to another therapist. But I think that up to a certain point, the consumers might be enjoying themselves doing it. But again, I'll tell you more once I run my interviews.
Interesting. So I look at you in the audience. Do you have any questions?
Yes.
Russell, wait for the microphone. Oh, you have.
Yeah, you had this a bit in the next to last slide, but in something like Wobot, which you had up, which is from Stanford originally, it uses cognitive behavioral therapy. And at the same time, if you have not just depression, but severe depression, and you say, I'm thinking of killing myself, it looks at that and says, well, isn't there a positive side to that? It's a little inadequate under those circumstances versus call this number immediately or call it for you. And so can this get into danger when it is over its head, if you will?
Yes, absolutely. And the extreme cases can be very dangerous. And that's why I think, that's why multiple chatbots are now integrating the referral function. So if you're feeling very bad, you can get a consultation with a therapist. So they kind of hybridize themselves. But I agree that the robots, they don't know much. And
and for an extra fee, you can get personal.
For an extra fee, yes. So without an extra fee, try to find the positive side in your severe depression. And that's, of course, as multiple, for example, my former university classmates, my colleagues who are now psychologists and professional psychotherapists, they call it the bastardization of profession. So they're very negative towards this. But again, we need to go deeper without labeling things. But I agree with you, Russ, that might be quite dangerous for consumers. The robots, like the psychotherapy robot situation. Yes?
There's a paper by Rob Koznets, and it's a JM paper about digital platforms and ecosystems. hubs. Do you remember this one, 2017 perhaps?
No, I need to take a look
it's a
at
GM.
it.
I can send
Yes.
you. No worries.
Thank you so much. Yes.
But then your explanation here, it seems to me that these apps, they are now like hubs because you still need the face-to-face interaction, especially in extreme cases. So in terms of business modeling or even understanding the context, they might be hubs and not just an end in itself.
Yes. I would say the bigger ones are. The bigger ones that have enough money, that have enough investment, they have integrated this functionality, and there are hundreds of smaller platforms that are not very well made. And again, as a consumer, we need consumer education in terms of what kind of app they can trust and what kind of app they cannot trust. Because yes, for example, Wysa or like the bigger apps, the Rooted, the Panic Attacks app, it redirects you to an expert immediately, and they even have a button. Do you have a person that you can trust? And if you're in the middle of a panic attack, you can push this button and this app will call your, for example, I don't know, it's like your relative or your friend or whoever's details you put into it.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, the time is running. I will just ask you one question that we got on Zoom, and that is, do you think this quick to fix yourself culture, what kind of impact will it have on retail in the future?
Well, I think that it's a fashion. I think that it's a fashion, and I think that the cultural pendulum is constantly oscillating between self-acceptance and self-improvement, and we have the radical acceptance, and then we have the radical improvement, and as long as retail follows the trends reasonably, by understanding what customers need at the moment, by understanding, I don't like this word, the latest fashions, it will be able to understand the relational logic that it needs to engage in order to provide the best type of service to the customers.
Okay, thank you. We will talk later also in the panel discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alisa.
Thank you
very much. So now it's time for Sofia Ulver, Associate Professor at Lund University.
Thank you.
And I think it's I hope we will learn more about this, that some research actually see that people who are not feeling well spend much more time on social media. So, for example, I'm very interested in what is the hen and what is the egg here. Is, the social media feeding the bad mental health issues? So, I say welcome to you, Sofia.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure I can answer those questions, but I'm surely interested in those things as well. So I'm Sofia Ulver. I'm an associate professor in Lund University, connected to this place. I am very delighted to have been invited to talk about something that was called Wellbeing, because I see myself as a compulsive pessimist and steeped in northern melancholia, so it's not really what I think of the most when I think of well-being, not my research anyway, but in an inverted kind of way. My research addresses well-being, maybe in the opposite way. And so I will be talking about if this is and I will need a pronunciation help from you, Belk. Is it oxymoron or oxymoron? Oxymoron. Thank you. Is it an oxymoron to talk about well-being in the social media age? And thank you, Elisa, for a really energetic and great presentation, full of information. And you were talking about well-being as a commodity in the end, or half of the presentation. And I will probably more talk about it as some kind of general, abstract, empirical experience connected to my research in general. I will take departure in Frances Haugen, the whistleblower on Facebook. She was a data scientist there and studied algorithms that she claimed had amplified human beings' insecurities and amplified misinformation, and actually was very destructive to democracy. And her general, at Facebook then, and that Facebook were hiding these facts that she had studied and actually generated through her research at Facebook. So the accusations were more specifically the harmful impact on especially children and young women, and that Facebook created divisions through misinformation, hate speech, and even violence by encouraging these ills. And this is where my research kind of comes in, where I've been very interested lately in divisions, or what we normally talk about in popular press and media as political polarization, and how the market and consumers are part of this, and consumer culture, and so on. And one of my articles called "The Conflict Market, Polarizing Consumer Culture and Counter-Democracy" from last year in journal Consumer Culture brings this up in terms of the monetization of conflict and the reproduction of political polarization, where I basically just reason conceptually about how it has become basically a business model impregnated by the need to create conflict and to offer have a consumer offer and depending on conflict or being the issue of conflict. And as an actor network, this would consist of many material, expressive, social, and different kind of actors that together in this network all the time prosper from this actual conflicts being created, and that more and more companies and more consumers, and not least the technologies, are calibrated with the issue of conflict. And this is, of course, part of what some would call, if we look at algorithms as culture. And for you who are interested in it, I'll just drop some of the typical references if you're interested in reading about it. Because in the algorithmic culture that makes us propense to conflict, you will have, for example, in the platform society, we are deemed subjects by the market's algorithmic control. We're seen as being that through the persuasive powers of algorithmic distortion, soft biopolitics, algorithmic identities, and the creation of audiences. So if we in the 50s, in the post-Second World War, were created, our identities were performed by market segmentation and forward, of course. Today, it's the algorithms that perform our identities and that we interact with. And of course, and now I sound like that melancholic, dark person leaning upon Dean, talking about the communicative capitalism as exploiting and managing communication, affect, here comes the well-being part, and sociality that materializes ideals of participation in communication technologies, absorbing resistance and intensifying global capitalism. But capitalism is something we always throw ourselves with as this one huge term, but this encompassing term, but it's not always the same. It has versions, and it has shifted over history, during history, and it's very important to think about these different versions of capitalism as being very much linked to charismatic politicians, virtues of the specific structure, and social cultural trickled down virtues of these versions of economy, and to think of our consumption as also very linked to that, our dreams, the way we live, and so on. And here it's the Counter-Democracy by Egan-Wyer, a French historian and sociologist, that I lean upon in that article, because he brings up specifically the sentiments. And this is what's connected to the opposite of well-being, right? Because the sentiments of what has been created since the 1990s, specifically, this idea of counter-democracy, is that it fosters a culture of discontent, resentment, and accusation, which if we live in a culture like that, it's no wonder that we also have the tendency to fall right into this business model or this model of life of where conflict is what is nourishing and creates is prospering. Also, but more importantly, we normally talk about co-optation in consumer culture theory and in consumer research and in marketing in general as a depoliticizing activity in marketing. That is, that we distract people from being political subjects by becoming consumers instead, that the market solves our problems instead of the politics. But here he talks rather about the unpolitical, that's what's connected to the conflict culture that I've been talking about. Because the unpolitical is not that you are apolitical, as in indifferent, or depoliticized, as in not at all thinking about politics, and rather, or thinking that market will solve. It can be related too, but here it's mostly that the unpolitical approach is that you are offering no proposition. You protest. It's all about enemy and conflict, basically. And within the marketing world, and this is also part of my research, we just published this one, me and my colleague Christian Koch, in Journal of Micromarketing, about how companies have this tendency to frame their very existence, the importance of their very existence, and the consumer offering as depending on conflict. And so we looked at, for example, how Oatly, which is the wheat-based, we're not supposed to say milk, drink, that are becoming creating the enemy relationship towards the milk industry, right? And the way of framing this as a war is not at all, nowadays that seems very tasteless, but still, there is this desire to be part of a conflict, as a part of this conflict market. So for example, one guy says, I got a call from John Schoolcraft almost 2.5 years ago. I was sitting in a cafe and he just asked me if I wanted to start a war with the milk industry all over the world. And I was just like, yeah, okay, yeah. And this is the kind of, feels good with this conflict. And there is also this construction of the consumer as someone who has to be on one or the other side, which is basically also part of the thought, the idea of division and polarization. And here they talk about, the David and Goliath, which is not anything new as such in marketing, but it is definitely becoming more and more ubiquitous. So why would people even want to not resist against all this conflict? Well, in another article that I've been writing, or that has been published in Marketing Theory, I talk about, and then I lean upon the more radicalized, Zizek's more radicalized Lacanian psychoanalysis, where the claim is that the unconscious desire not to resolve conflict, but to enforce it, that there is this unconscious desire. And I claim that this is what this increasing representation of conflict in marketing is part of. And I specifically look at how commercials in Sweden specifically connect to specific societal conflicts at the time. And here the idea of the parallax gap is quite interesting. Now you can get into that, it's quite a complex theory, but just to give you an idea, the parallax gap is it's an irreducible gap between versions of truth. It's a traumatic core around which the version of truth circulates, and there is no way to resolve that tension because the absent cause, the unfathomable X, undermines every narrative solution. And this object tickles the subject. And it's this tickling that creates our unconscious desire of this conflict, of getting into these conflicts. And I say there that the cultural branding that is going on here with trying to solve conflict and solve anxiety by solving contradictions instead becomes a deadlocked space between polar perspectives where solution is impossible. And the parallax object's upholding of gruesome tension and suspense, I call this fetishistic tickling, where the capitalist subject, the marketeer, goes on because he knows or she knows or they know there is no acceptable true version to be found in the parallax gap, but pretends there is one because the parallax gap, the void made up by tension, tickles so good. So all in all, the conflict market creates this de-dialectical market, not with synthesis. It's unpoliticizing, it creates politics without propositions, and it is renouncing. So it's renouncing certain kind of consumers, masses of consumers, which would never have happened before. And so it's sacrificing certain kinds of the market. This could be called platform antagonism, and why I bring that up is because the solution, trying to be a little bit optimistic, I could lean upon Mouffe, Chantal Mouffe, the political theorist, who would say that we must not talk to each other as we must not frame each other as enemies, which is exactly what I've been talking about, that is happening. To put it in another way, what is important is that conflict does not take the form of an antagonism, struggle between enemies, but the form of agonism. So this is a theoretical idea of political conversation that is not happening in what I call the conflict market. It's a struggle between adversaries rather than a struggle between enemies. The other part, I have a lot of empirical stuff going on, trying to match my conceptual model, but I'm not going to go through that now. Now I'll talk about the harm. And here I am just beginning to do research, and so this is mostly reflective and bringing in other people's ideas. But when it comes to harm, Frances Haugen's claim was that she found in her studies at Facebook that the impact on especially teenage girls, there are some critique against this representation of just girls as a gendered kind of demonization, but still, this is the accusation that 13.5% say their suicidal thoughts became more frequent after using Instagram, which is owned by Facebook now, Meta. 17% say eating orders go up, 32% say they feel worse about their bodies, and blah, blah, blah. And Facebook intentionally targets children under age 13 with an addictive product despite the app requiring users to be 13 years or older. That kind of accusation. And one very central part of all these things on Instagram that's going on is the selfie. And I find the selfie, and I think you have written about selfies in the digital self, not least. But I'm just getting close to that topic, and I find it I'm writing a chapter together with Jonas Rocca in Consumer Culture Theory's new textbook, where we'll probably use the selfie as a departure. And the selfie is, of course, a photograph that one has taken of oneself and shared via social media. There are many types of selfies. If you can find them in the consumer research literature: autobiography, parody, propaganda, romance, self-help, travel diaries, coffee table book, and meta-narrative selfies, and so on. They are there to show some kind of personness, slice of life, I was here-ness, some kind of authenticity. And of course, I would connect it to your disembodied self, Russ. Rocca and Caniford have also written about it in terms of how brands are using them, but that consumers' heterotopian selfies destabilize brand assemblage through their material and expressive components. So they're used both by consumers, producers, and of course there's a capitalist platform in the bottom. So with my dark soul, I would lean upon Han to think about the South Korean philosopher. to think about the selfie as part of this digital beauty aesthetics, for example, where he says that all these things are part of a permanent self-mirroring. That the digital world is increasing this permanent self-mirroring, and that the digital retina turns the world into screen and control monitor inside this autoerotic visual space, creating a digital inwardness. And of course, this inwardness has always been there. This is Norman Rockwell, 1954's Girl at Mirror. Picasso also had a Girl at Mirror, but this was also called Girl at Mirror. Where nothing is actually permanent in this picture. Everything has been moved around, and so is her identity. She is kind of losing herself to this face in her lap. Why do I not look like her? And losing herself to beauty ideals that are outside of her normal everyday. And of course, this could be analyzed also by Lacan and all these things, but let's not do that here. This is just what's happening here is that she's mirroring herself, and but it's not networked and shared, and that's what makes all these things so complex in today's selfies compared to like art history, self-portraits, and so on. So instead we talk about these things we can talk a little bit more positively about selfies than I think of them, but creating a meaningful image of the self, of course, and they communicate narrative autonomy in that they demonstrate the agency of the person behind the lens by simultaneously putting that person in front of it. And that's, of course, something different. It disrupts singularity and points to a plurality of selves. And so the plurality of selves is really interesting here, because you have a series of published selves that you have to relate to. 5 minutes, that's good. I think I'm in time. I think I'll make it. It holds together a number of different elements of mediated digital consumption or communication. It inscribes one's own body into new forms of mediated, expressive sociability with distant others. And this distant others, if you had imagined others before, of course there are still imagined others for the Girl at the Mirror, but these are distant others, and it will have response. There will be responses, and if there's not, people take them away. That's one of the consequences, which if you don't get a response, it's as if you are not, as if you do not exist, if there is no distant other responding to you. But also, we have to look at this from a more critical point of view, as like Murray says in Consumption, Market and Culture. As a technological and capitalist-driven form of visual representation, the selfie is as much a gateway into the economics of social division as it is highly personalized, effective vehicle for self-expression. And this is where I would lean upon the Swedish cartoonists, because there's not much research that looks at the experience of this other's selfies. And in Sweden, so this is Liv Strömquist's picture, just a credit to her, where she writes, she tries to understand her own hypnotization with Kendall Jenner. So basically said, I'm not really interested in Kylie, but I can still not stop to in a hypnotized way, stare at her hour in and hour out. And it's this complete absorption by others' selfies that is quite interesting, how that is created and what that is all about. And maybe it has something to do with Han, and I turn to him again, the aesthetics of smooth that is being networked in digital media. The smooth is an optimized surface without negativity. It causes a sensation which is entirely free of pain or resistance. So there is no resistance, so we get completely absolved in these images. But there are, of course, experiences of this that are creating what Frances Haugen was talking about, all this social comparison, envy, anxiety, all these psychology, all these emotions and effects, and not well-being, I would say. But at the same time, the selfie makers de-responsibilize what they do because they're just part of a whole system, of a whole culture. So Kendall Jenner would definitely say, or Kylie Jenner, sorry, I'm not here to try and encourage people, young girls, to look like me or to think this is the way they should look. But despite that, Liv writes, despite that, Kylie writes that she does not want to encourage people, young girls, to look like her. People want to look like her. And this is exactly what is happening in this in the Frances Haugen accusation that I was talking about before. So just to sum up a little bit, the selfie would then, according to all these different concepts I just presented, the selfie assembles the effective expression of multiple selves, which is difficult, complex in itself, with the forces of the economic system and an alienating sociability into perfectly smooth, amputated beauty. Why is it amputated? Well, it's because it's limited by the network. Commodified, co-produced, and destabilized non-identity. All these non-well-being kind of things. Serving apparent parts of the market economy, like the tech industry, beauty industry, fashion, but also emotional capitalism, therapeutic industries. You can just think of all the derogatory terms that were used when the harm to people was presented at the Senate in Frances Haugen's testimony. If there is a solution, maybe Byung-Chul Han also has that solution. And he talked about the smoothest and optimized surface without negativity, blah, blah, blah. But then beauty and the sublime. The sublime is not without negativity. It has resistance, it has scars, it has a scratch, it has some pain. But Edmund Burke, the philosopher, split them up. And Byung-Chul Han means that they should be put together again. They should marry again. Beauty and the sublime have the same origin. Instead of opposing the sublime to the beautiful, one should return to beauty, a sublimity that cannot be subjected to inwardness, a desubjectivizing sublimity, and thus undo the separation of beauty and the sublime. I think that should be it for me. And of course, there are many things I want to do research about here, but I'm not sure I answered your question, Katarina.
After you have done your research.
That's right.
Yes, there's so many interesting things here. I think it's really like been working with social media and people feeling not very good, especially young ones, because I think. My main question maybe is this, that most research on this is still on social media. If you look at, for example, young people, and maybe you know this study from the States, Twenge, who came with the idea in 2012 that everything is the smartphones. It's just because of the smartphone that people feel so bad. And for me as an anthropologist, that's really difficult because so many things in today's society is actually happening. Climate change, difference in leaderships, political leaderships, there's so many things going on. So you can't actually look at one thing to say that is this the answer to why so many young people actually feel bad today. So how will you approach that in your research?
Well, I think that's a very important point, because a lot of consumer researchers are talking about this demonization as simplistic and utterly wrong, that we focus so much on what I did now. I focused on the ills and the bad parts, and it becomes like a very simplified way to look at things. And consumer research and CCT, for example, has done a fantastic job for decades to also bring out the less dystopic parts of consumer culture, and everything from materialism to to social media and how you can actually, how we appropriate and use in an agentic way. But here I am afraid that we have to do with something that is so much larger than ourselves. So I am quite pessimistic here, and do think that we need to stop the freight train, because there's so much economic divisions here that are being enforced by this extremely capital dense small elite that drives this whole thing. And it's so strong, and it's so that we need to make some kind of resistance also in our research. Not that it doesn't have to be activists, but we need to look at and all the time survey and explore what happens to us during this freight train.
Well, I could talk for a long time with you, but I think that's maybe we have questions in the audience. Russell?
The selfie is interesting because it's not like a photo album, or it's not like when we used to have websites, but on Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat and so forth, it's a moment. And so it's not a selfie, but it's a series of selfies, which is not about being, but about becoming or hoping to become. And so it's ephemeral in that sense. And I'm wondering how that relates to the well-being and sense of self, when you can't just be a static self of having achieved something, but rather, what are you doing now? That was yesterday. What about today? And you need to keep up this dialogue with whoever is following you. And so I wonder if even the notion of selfie is sort of an old-fashioned way of looking at representation.
Yeah, and I guess that the plurality and multiple self becomes, and the series, but there's also the published difference and the series of published selves, right? Well, psychologically, we could of course talk about fragmentation, and social culturally, we would talk about that it's not useful anymore to talk about a coherent self-narrative. But here it's something I have yet not understood really how to think about it philosophically. That there are these published, networked, shared representations of selves that will always be out there, probably, and they will always be part of me or you, whatever that unit is. Yeah, I don't know. I think you should write something. You would answer that brilliantly. But that's exactly what I want to understand myself. Yeah.
I think Alisa has a question also.
Yeah. I find it very interesting. Thank you so much, Sophia, for this wonderful presentation. I find it fantastic that you mentioned Eva Illouz and the idea of emotional capitalism. And I know that Eva Illouz, she has been researching the marketplace of love for a long time. She talks about the romantic utopia and the happycracy, this like culture of like, you must be happy, otherwise something is wrong with you. Do you think, coming back to your earlier research on conflict markets and the outrage culture, do you think it can be conceived as kind of like, the dark side of the emotional capitalism, because the processes are quite similar?
That's also an interesting self, interesting self. That's an interesting perspective on it, because it's like a backlash then on the happy, Ehrenreich's the happy pill, basically. That would be an interesting thought, because it's like, in that case, a suppressed kind of, a collectively suppressed need of unconscious conflict. Yeah, maybe it's a good idea. Yeah. Sophia?
Yeah, so do you see like an opposite side of it? I'm thinking especially about metaverse and the avatar economy. Like, do you see, because there are huge differences and not very much focusing on the selfie and the real me, but the avatar and actually buying a lot of things to my avatar and everything. Is that something that you see is changing as well?
Oh, I don't understand the question really. I'm sorry. If I see the connection?
Yeah, so a lot of things happening, like when you go from the actual real world, where selfies are a lot of importance and everything, and when you look at the metaverse and the avatar economy, where you actually create the person that you are, and do you see like a shift there, or?
If I see a shift in
like how you actually see yourself. Like
Okay.
when you-
Yeah. No, but that's it. There are interesting. I cannot answer that question actually, but I found some research interest that I think you've touched upon, Russ, that's a long time ago though. But that there is a lot of research on that the effects and emotions and this identification become stronger when you don't pretend. You don't do an avatar that is unlike you, but you do an avatar that is like you. Or yeah, but I don't know if that has something to do. So then I'm thinking maybe the selfie is would in that case lead to more avatars like you. Is that kind of what you mean? Or,
Yeah, but I think it's an interesting shift.
Yeah,
like
it's-
going from very like a focus on yourself and then creating something totally new that's
totally new. Yeah.
not at all like you, but something that you would like to be in this world. Yeah.
But of course, the avatar never ages, but your selfies do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, nice thought.
Yes. Well, I think that to not become too aged now, we really need coffee.
Yeah.
So it's a coffee break now, and you should go this way out, and we will be back here at 10:35. Welcome back after the little break. Now we will listen to Vitor Lima, and you're assistant marketing at the business school of Audencia.
Okay.
Yes, and we also have Russell Belk. Can you please just come up or show your face in this presentation? Vitor will do the presentation, and then you will help with the questions, I think. That's the, honor being an older professor, to just sit and wait for the questions. So I said welcome, and we are happy to hear your presentation.
Thank you so much once again. Hello everyone, nice to see you all here, face to face. I cannot see those online, but hi. Nice that you're there at this time in the morning. So welcome, my name is Vitor once again. I'm from Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, beautiful city. But now I live in France, where I'm an assistant professor of marketing at Audencia. My work is obviously about futurism, transhumanism, cyborgs, robots, AI, technology, future. That's it. Together with Russ, we have been working on many topics, many different research projects on these crazy ideas. And because of that, I ask you now, please keep your mind and heart open. It's a bit different than my colleagues here early this morning. So I hope you enjoy and feel free to ask what would you have to, as a curiosity and so on. All right? Perfect. So no cash, no coins, no cards, but you biohacking or biohacking the future of payments. Right. Everything that I'm discussing here, presenting here to you, is pretty much connected to the idea of transhumanism. So transhumanism, for you, some of you may know it, but I'm not sure if all of you knows it. But then transhumanism means that we have to use technology, or we have to take technology ethically, in the sense that these technologies may help us, human beings, to become enhanced, to become optimized, to extreme, move from the Homo sapiens biological, let's say, stage to another one, which will be the transhuman way or condition. All right? It's obviously speculative on the one hand. I'm going to show you some technologies that may lead us to these stages, but we also have some emerging technologies these days, today, that can help us to achieve this transhuman status, and for the better or for the worse. This is very important to be very clear here. So this guy here is Professor Warwick. He was one of the first biohackers or transhumanists enthusiast to work on his own body and try new stuff, connecting technology, so wires and computers, directly to his body to do stuff. And when I say to do stuff that all of us here cannot do, actually, because our biological bodies, they don't do it, actually, right? Unless, do we have any cyborgs here? Yeah, in a sense, yes. But do you have any, like, computer something implant? No, not today, all right. Not a prerequisite to have it. But especially here in the case of this book chapter that, whoops, don't get hurt, don't worry. In the case of this book chapter, we're discussing biohacking. And biohacking is pretty much the usage of biotechnology to change your body. It's somehow at the individual level. But biohacking actually these days is super sexy, it's trendy. Right? So you say that you are a biohacker because you wake up at 5 in the morning and then you do this and do that, you do fast and do... This is not exactly the biohacking that I'm interested in here, right? You have these gurus selling, as Elisa mentioned, selling this kind of super well-being by drinking coffee, by drinking this, by taking that. Once again, that's not the kind of biohacking that I'm discussing here. All right. If you go to Los Angeles in the United States, you have clinics selling this. If you go to Beverly Hills, so that's why I'm saying that's hot in this sense. All right. But then biohacking is a kind of umbrella of term. It comprises many kinds of activities, of practices to further this condition. And usually these self-experiments, they are bold, sometimes extreme. There's no regulation or clear regulation when it comes to the limit. So can you do it? It's your own body, but can you do it? How far can you go replacing a limb by choice? How far can you go taking cognitive enhancers without having any mental health or mental issue? So these sort of questions that biohackers and transhumanists have been trying to engage with, right? So there's no answer here, or only one answer, or one size fits all answer here, all right? How's my time? I'm good. So this is just a visual when it comes to biohacking as an umbrella term. I'm not sure if you can read everything, but very quickly here, you have something more software-based, you have something more biochemical-based, and obviously you have something more hardware-based. And today we're going to discuss this last one here, grinding, the hardware-based. If you have $200,000, you can go to the US, and when you're about to die, you can freeze your body cryogenically and stay there until the cure for your disease can be discovered, and then you come back. If you don't have $200,000, you just have, let's say, $80,000, just your head is frozen. So that's an option. That's an option. That's an option, right? But then when it comes to genome editing, one ethical question that comes to mind is, would you do some sort of modification on your body? Would you hire some clinics to work on your body, to change your DNA or to change your germline level so your future kid won't have a disease? So in my case, for instance, I have a chronic disease in my family. I have no kids yet. As a future father, I would say yes, if this is available, if an in vitro fertilization procedure, something is available, so my future kid, she, he, they don't have a problem, well, I think I will do it. It's my kid or my future kid. But anyway, I come from Brazil, a poor country. How many of my Brazilian friends with or without money could do something like this? Are we going to create a marketplace, a kind of service that will serve those who are rich and can have these kind of modifications, or not? So there's no regulation or clear regulation when it comes to, once again, transhumanism, biohacking, enhancement, right? And that is our, at least my research agenda for the last, since my PhD, 2017, all right? And specifically here for today, this is, super fast. Watch out. Grinding the implantation of microchips. And here, Sweden, you guys, there's this Swedish microchip phenomenon here. Moa Peterson from your university is a super researcher. Is she here? No, she's not here. All right, but Moa Peterson has a nice book on this, right? Until months ago, you could ride here on your train system just by using your microchip to pay for your ticket. I think it's not working anymore, but anyway, this is something real here in Sweden, which is very, very interesting. If you want to have some implantation or interaction with biohackers developing this kind of solution here, go to Stockholm at the Epicenter, the Innovation Hub. They do stuff there. It's very, very interesting. There is a picture here. I forgot the name of this guy, Johan something. So he's showing here his COVID passport. It's a PDF. And you can store it. In France, we have an app from the government that is updated actually automatically, right? It expires if you don't download the new one. It's super.
You're not a good citizen.
Exactly. So there is morality in terms of being a good citizen is attached to your updates of your app, of COVID app. So here you can have the PDF stored in your microchip and then presented to the authorities here. So that's interesting. I could do it. I have this kind of technology implanted here. This one, it has the size of a rice. Mine is here in my left hand. With this one, I can open doors and transfer you my business card, send you a malicious link so I can have all your details to access your bank accounts and stuff like that. Enjoy. If you feel free to tap here, and then you. Sophia, I think she did it earlier today, so now she's kind of, all of your, she has 10 Bitcoins now and they are mine. I'm kidding. But anyway, so imagine that this kind of technology that we are used to have outside the body, now they are becoming inside our bodies. One thing is to have an Apple Watch, right? If you are bored, tired, or if you are, some sort of, are you afraid of something, data collection, you just can leave it here. And that's fine, theoretically fine. It's one way to relate with technology. But then what do you do when something is inside of you? What do you do if you have to go to a doctor? Incision, 2 stitches, blood. Do you deal well with it? So the body becomes something more replaceable, disposable, commodified. So then health, well-being, how do we treat these conceptual categories in relation to the body, or a body that can be replaceable? This is the idea of transhumanism when it comes to the notion of body, all right? Body is just a vehicle to the future. It's a place of passage, right? Oops. Transhumanism has three major goals, if you will. The major goal is super well-being, but before it, we have super intelligence, which means that we are going to consume cognitive enhancers, or nootropics, or smart drugs. Modafinil, I'm not sure if you have it here in Sweden. Modafinil? No? Prozac?
Prozac, yeah.
Yeah.
But not that one.
Yeah, I imagine, yeah. Right, modafinil, Adderall? Yeah, yes? Okay. Many biohackers, many transhumanists, actually they have been mixing these medications, because they are medications, as a way to achieve new levels of cognition, intelligence, and so on. This will be the super intelligence part. There's a nice book by Nick Bostrom, 2003, if I'm not wrong, called Super Intelligence. It has a null on the cover. It's a nice book, interesting book, easy to read. The second S here will be super intelligence, super well-being, and there is the super longevity. So here in Sweden, what is the average when it comes to lifetime? 70-something, 80-something? Yeah. In the beginning, actually, when transhumanism became a social movement, the idea is to achieve immortality, but it's impossible. You can have an accident, right? And they reframed the idea of living forever to living longer, right? So that's the super longevity. And for instance, in Silicon Valley, now it's super common to find people funding startups, investigating how to cure aging once they treat aging as a disease. So as an anthropologist, is it okay to say that, well, you're getting old, so you were sick? So how do we deal with this kind of, creation of a new meaning or creation of a discourse around aging, which is, once again, a normal, natural process, all of us, in relation to a new discourse on technology, progress, and so on, self-optimization, self-improvement, and so on. So once again, and here I'm going to show you a new company, Walmart. They are working with new payment systems. And, well, this is what you asked me earlier. Let's watch.
Hey, in this video I'm going to show you how Wallet implant works in real life. After ordering a drink, food, or any other product, all you need to do is tap in your hand to the payment terminal. Forget about the cash, card, or even a smartphone. All you need is your hand. Wallet implants are biosafe, secure, ultimately convenient, and they are globally acceptable. Wallet is a wallet of tomorrow. Get into the new era of payments and get your implant now.
So watching a video like this, I asked myself, well, why not? It's super convenient. It makes sense. Obviously here there's all this discursive element trying to convince us that, well, the new normal, quote unquote here, will be this. And if you don't have something like this, then you're going to have a problem because, right? Going back to my context, my Brazilian context, well, money in Brazil, the paper, the piece of paper, has a meaning that in Canada, when I was living in Canada, well, it was completely different the way people deal with the materiality of money. In France, I just use my card, right? We don't pay stuff with cash. It's rare.
Since the last 5 years, used to be very different 10 years ago.
Right? So, just cards. In Brazil, it's super normal. you go to a place and you see someone using a massive amount of paper cash to buy stuff. They don't actually trust when it comes to the card. And there's a historical actually explanation for it. There's a sociocultural explanation for it. But then imagine how a system like this, an embodied technology, would work in a context like mine, like in Brazil, or like in France, and so on. Right? I'm not saying here in Sweden because, once again, here I think about 4,000 Swedish people already have something like this. So it's a lot, right? If you want, all right. Let's see another video, but this one is real life.
I don't think so, actually. You can try it. I never saw something. Imagine. How did you do it? I have a chip. I don't believe it. You can see it. Are you really masked or something?
So the first video, why not? Super easy, right? Convenient. And the second one, you may think, well, if I use something like that, yeah, what is the consequence? Stigma, shame, humiliation, persecution sometimes, harassment, and so on. I was telling them yesterday I had to prove there was not Satan once because I wanted to pay with my microchip. You know, the biblical mark of the beast, 666, manifestation, forehead and right hand. Yeah. First I tried to convince that what mine is here on the left hand. So I'm out, you know. But then, yes, we are laughing here, but there's this real life situation, right? Harassment. I have a colleague in Brazil. He is waiting for Brazilian authorization to carry a gun because he has this group, extremists, harassing and threatening him. So it's very complicated. It's hype. Once again, it's hype. Might be sexy, might be trendy, might be cool, but another situation actually. This is part of an ethnographic work that we have been developing since 2017. Actually, it's a paper already under review, a tough review, if you allow me to share. First round. But anyway, you can see here, this guy is one of the main, biohackers, super vocal. He has 32 microchips implanted in his, body, and he describes actually the encounter during a visa renovation. The price for everything, but priceless actually was the Chinese visa employees' reactions. So he's mocking. Should we mock others? Should we feel harassed? Should we harass? Think, he is the other, right? O, capital O. So how can we make it more inclusive and less, Service encounter, this is a promising research, let's say, area if you are interested in. Some ethical challenges that will come from the embodiment, from this kind of technology. Social cultural acceptance, in my case, and in case of the bartender. Morphological freedom, which means that we should be free to do or to be whatever we want. Right? Equal access to self-enhancement technologies, and once again, remember my example in my country, which is poor. The rich will have access to technologies of betterment or enhancement to have better quote unquote, better kids. And then you're going to have two different groups, enhanced and non-enhanced. Is it fair? And the last point here, data privacy. In Europe, we have GDPR. There's no one single line saying anything about data from the inside the body, but data that we as users, we generate. And I understand that the data that I have inside my body has a level of sensitivity. The data that I generate on Facebook might be another level, and so on and so forth. Back in Brazil, or even in Canada, it's not clear what you can do. It's not clear what you can have in terms of different kinds of data and how you have to deal with it, to protect these people, right? Oops. To have an idea, all of these companies, they have been developing something relating to human enhancement technologies, all of them. Google has Calico to kill death, as they mentioned. Rejuve is a database, it's a source for robot care. Novartis, a huge pharmaceutical developing cognitive enhancers. And so despite all of this sounding, speculative fiction, you already have big companies, big money working on this, right? To wrap it up, Neil Harbinson once said that I don't feel I'm using technology, I feel that I am technology. So this changes a lot, many, many things. Thanks.
Thank you, Victor. Shall we have also Russell on stage? I have some questions, of course. I think one thing you said now in the end is that this guy Neil, what's his name?
Harbinson.
Yeah, because when you look at young people, for example, because we are a little bit older, it's really interesting how they define themselves, because they define themselves as digital, maybe compared to us a little bit older who always have the phone as, part of our body instead, like Marsha McLuhan said. So I think it will be a very, very different thing when those grow up. Because my main question actually is, what is the benefit of having the chip?
Not yet, no. So you mean personally,
yeah,
or
for
what
you
is
as a
exclusively
for you as a person, for you as an individual, or you as a consumer? What is the benefits, would you say?
The first step is convenience. Actually, this is inclusive. This is the discursive, that's it, convenience.
Yeah.
You can replace many, many things just by using this. So that's it.
So do you think that the convenience will be more important than all the other ethical issues?
I think one thing doesn't answer to all of these ethical things, because they are, for instance, how can this answer questions about genetic modification in terms of enhancement? And everything's so new, so there's no answer actually. And obviously, one size fits all, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's also keeping up with the robots and AI, because that's becoming more pervasive and more capable. And we mere humans have to catch up and try to retain our jobs and relevance in society. And maybe that sounds like science fiction, but although this Chinese example of having the gratification of befuddling the Chinese visa authorities, sounds like China is behind. It's really ahead, because they have this external facial recognition. So you can go to a bank and withdraw money with your face. And this is something that sounds like it's going to become outmoded because our faces age. But remember, a few years ago, Facebook had send in a picture of yourself 10 years ago. And so it's learning how we age and how the face changes. And this is not internal, this is more the external robotic part. And so if we're going to try to catch up with that, what do we do to keep up with the robots, if you will?
Yeah. So there's there's some very, very early research saying that people don't feel comfortable with the idea of non-enhancement. So yeah, that might be something interesting to pay attention to, because once again, if you have the chance to become enhanced, that might give you some sort of advantage. So imagine cognitive enhancers and you are looking for a job. And you were trying to, fight for the same position, but you are super high, super intelligent because of nootropics. So is it fair? How can we regulate it?
And I also think it's interesting because you also talked about the definition of money, currency.
Yeah.
When it's outside you, now it's becoming part of you as a human. That's a really interesting philosophical question, I think. Will you dig into that more? Or?
Yeah, you had that paper on the meanings of money with Melanie.
Yeah, but not so much the internal, external aspects of it. And money is becoming more ephemeral. It's always something where we have to invest trust in this thing, and typically it's been a government fiat money, but now we're having Bitcoin and other private sorts of agencies, and this is another way of saying this is decentralized, it's power to the people, it's no longer this central authority that's governing us. And I think that principle of decentralization is part of a lot of things these days as well.
Yeah, some of these technologies actually, they run on blockchain, which means will be secure and decentralized by nature. But once again, it's new. In the case of payments, it's new. Yeah.
So, I turn, yes. Maybe we need the microphone, Emma.
Hey, Victor, thanks for the presentation. You asked us to keep an open mind and an open heart, and I certainly did, to the extent that I encourage and support your choice to have a chip. It's not something that I would want for myself. And I think that it's important that there's also a critique made to some of the sci-fi kind of excitement around biohacking. But with that said, you mentioned, especially with the TikTok clip of the bartender, the issue of stigmatism or discrimination. And I wanted to ask you about this choice of word of enhancement and the three goals then of superintelligence and the other ones you mentioned, in a way that's also presenting not being enhanced or not having this type of biohacking as lesser. And do you see that there's maybe a dilemma or a challenge framing it in that sense? And what would you suggest to those that are framing it as an enhancement to try and avoid discrimination in both ways?
Well, I don't, sure. Thank you for your question. I thought you were wanted to say something, but yeah, thank you.
You had said that there was a lot of people in Sweden and 4,000, and I was just remarking that 4,000 out of a country of 10 million isn't maybe a lot, but that was my
you're correct. You're correct. How can I say that? You are completely fine, and you're correct. I don't have an answer for that, how to solve it. I think no one has, especially...
The haves and have-nots of society is certainly there today with money. And this goes back to Katarina's question. And so it's very parallel to that. There's speculative fiction like Elysium, where the rich live up on a hill and it's guarded. And whether we have these internal modifications or it's simply a matter of money, we have the similar sort of bifurcation of society or stratification of society.
Yeah, it's paradoxical for sure. It's dangerous for sure. But it's happening, and I think we have to discuss, perhaps try to suggest some limits, some regulation. Otherwise, things can get out of control. And then science fiction helps us to understand what can happen if you don't control stuff, right? Once again, coming from Brazil, my country is poor. So for me, it's super easy to say, well, the structure when it comes to rich and poor, well, I get it, and I get it very, very well. When it comes to enhancement, all right, but there's therapy too. So where's the limit between, enhancing and cheating, treating and cheating? I don't have an answer. but there are some discussions on that for sure. And it's important to do something like. Do you work with something related to that? No? Well, welcome. Be my guest to try to propose them, because it's nice, it's interesting, and once again, it's a very early discussion, so it's you have lots of room to try.
I think we continue later in the panel discussion. Thank you very much, both of you.
All right.
Thank you. And now it's time for the last speaker before the discussion, and it's Sofia Nyrén, Business Owner Partnership at Swish.
Yes.
And you will talk about the future of retail payments.
Exactly. So nice
Welcome.
to be here. Thank you so much. So I'm here to represent the reality and the real world, and representing the Swedish payment mobile system, Swish. And I will talk a bit about the short-term trends that we see when it comes to payments, but also the long-term. And I love that Vidar and Russell were talking about biohacking, and I will continue talking about that a bit further into my presentation. But just to get a context in here, like how many of you in place has Swish today? Yeah, okay, so there's a majority, and I'm not sure if you guys online, but I will try to get to explain to you what Swish is and how complex our infrastructure actually is as well. So Swish was actually founded in 2012, so we're actually celebrating 10 years this year. And what is Swish then? So we're actually an account-to-account payment solution in real time. So we are actually clearing and settling money in real time 24/7. And we have built this infrastructure very unique. If you look around in the world and you compare to card rails and other payment systems, Swish is kind of unique and very early in this kind of transactions and payments. I will talk a bit more about how the ecosystem and the infrastructure looks. But we actually have one of the largest account-based payment services in Europe. I would actually say, as far as when it comes to market penetration, we have one of the biggest market penetration in the world when it comes to mobile payments. So comparing like to China and so on and so on, that has Alipay, WeChat as well, we are at similar levels, even above that in some areas. We're actually fully free of charge for the consumer. And we were founded by the 6 largest banks in Sweden. So they are the owner of GetSwish, which is the company behind the infrastructure and technology Swish. And we have solutions peer-to-peer and consumer-to-business, and more than 2.5 million transactions every day. So as I mentioned, the market penetration here. So roughly 90% of all Swedish adults have Swish. And if you narrow it down even more, and you look at the ages 16 to 55, up against 98% of all the Swedes have Swish. And if you compare that to China and Alipay and WeChat Pay, they have roughly 85%. So I think that's very cool to say that Sweden is so far ahead when it comes to mobile payments. As I mentioned, we process roughly around 2.5 million transactions every day. More than 50% of these transactions goes to companies, so that's where we see the most growth in the commerce segment. On our record days, we've actually processed up against 4 million transactions on one day. And it's very connected to salary and stuff like that. So we're also very preferred in the online and e-commerce segment, and we can see that a lot of Swedish consumers prefer to pay with Swish when they shop online. And getting back to the infrastructure on Swish, this is basically the ecosystem that we have. So if you look at Swish, we are actually responsible for the scheme, the brand, and the technology. But we're not responsible for selling the service towards the market. It's our participating and owning banks that actually has the customer acquisition and support relationship towards the market. And even behind that, we have integrations towards the banks, and then we have integrations to Bankgirot, which is clearing and settlement. which after that is also integrated in the Swedish National Bank real-time settlement system. And we also use Bank ID for identification and authentication. So it's kind of a complex ecosystem where a lot of parts has to match and work together. So just to get a view on how Swish works. We have 5 different services out there today. So most of you are familiar with Swish for Private, which is actually sending payments to peer-to-peer private transactions. And this is something that was our first service in 2012. Over the years, we have launched a lot of more services, especially on focusing on companies. And we have the Swish for Companies, which is just like a light version of company payments, where the account is actually just tokenized so that you can send money in real time as a private person. And then we have the most integrated solution, which is the Swish for Commerce, which is basically an API that you integrate in your cash register or e-commerce platform or whatever you would like to receive payments in real time. We also have a company app and Swish Payouts, which is exactly what it sounds, payouts in real time instantly. When you look at the growth for Swish, we have actually been growing a lot in the e-commerce over the past years. And I would say that we have roughly around 20% of the market share when it comes to e-commerce in Sweden and the payments there. But if you look at the studies from E-barometern, for example, which is released every year, 64% of the Swedish consumers prefer to pay with Swish when they actually shop online. So we do have a lot of potential to grow there as well. We do also see like examples where if you put Swish on top of your checkout, that you actually get an increased conversion rate, but also NPS as well. So I think that's super interesting cases. But I'm not going to talk too much about e-commerce and what we have done, more about what we're looking into the future. So my job is very much looking into how can we get Swish. I mean, we're very preferred online, but how can we get the consumers to actually prefer to pay with Swish in the retail and physical environments as well. So now I'm going to look a bit more on the short-term trends that we see where Swish is also a great solution when it comes to payments. And that is the trend that the phone is becoming the new point of sale. And I would say, like, if you have the example where you have the chip and you have a terminal, I would say that's not the future, because terminals will probably be phased out because it's a lot of technology, it's hardware, and it's a lot of issues for the staff. So we see that it's the phone that will be the point of sale, that will be the terminal in the future. And that's also something that we see with our partners who actually have cash registers or payment service providers, that they are going towards this, to have cloud-based solutions where the phone or the iPad or something else is the point of sale. And I would say what actually is driving this is, of course, that the remote control in our lives is the phone. I mean, I'm not sure how many of you would actually go back if you forget your phone at home before leaving to work. I'm pretty sure that most of you would actually go back and get it. But if you forget your card or your wallet, then maybe you would be okay with your phone as the only tool. So this is what's driving the mobile as the point of sale. If you look into this even further, we're seeing that self-scanning apps is something that's driving this trend as well. And you can see a lot of examples that has risen throughout the pandemics. You can see examples from grocery stores launching self-scanning apps. And if you look at the report Sweden Pays 2021, you can actually see that 85% of Swedish consumers, they prefer to self-serve themselves, either if they don't have to stand in line. So they are going towards self-service solutions, self-checkout, self-scanning apps, and that kind of solutions. This also enables a lot of different experiences when it comes to retail, and I would like to call this everywhere retail. So if you look at the phone as the mobile point of sale, this opens a lot of possibilities for you as a retailer. So actually enabling payments inside from the fitting room, or at a concert, or a pop-up store, or at a fashion show, just by scanning a QR or blipping an NFC tag to get the item that you want right away. So this opens up totally new possibilities. And now it's not working. Okay. Something else that's also growing, and it's kind of close to the self-scanning apps, is the unmanned stores that has absolutely blown throughout the pandemics, but also if you look around in Sweden. And it's not just centralized to the big cities, but also the rural areas and the countrysides that actually enables a lot of merchants to have totally other opening hours and decreasing staff and actually doing and bringing value to the consumers. So this is also driving this trend, mobile as the point of sale. Another thing that we also see, like I was talking about it, that all of the cash register systems, all the payment service providers, they are moving from this old tech, like the terminal as the point of sale, the big, cash registers that them with a lot of like technology, taking a lot of space in the retail environment, actually changing this to cloud-based solutions. So the staff can all of a sudden just download an app in their phone and actually been able to meet their consumers wherever they are in the store. And this also opens up totally other solutions for the staff, as well as loyalty programs, CRM, and actually being able to give totally new services towards the consumers. And least but not least, when you look at this trend, restaurants and food delivery apps are also driving this concept where you actually can see the mobile as the point of sale. And if you look a bit more long term, you can't really not talk about the metaverse. I would guess that it's the buzzword of the year. Not the least because Facebook changed their name. But I think it's something that we're definitely looking into from Swish point of view. And not the least by, I think it was GDR UK that has in their report that if you look to South Korea and Generation Z, they are actually spending more money on virtual products and items to their avatars than in the real world. So that's why there's definitely something happening here. So we have to be on our toes and actually try to experiment with this. So we have actually built, this is my avatar in the Swish world. So we have built this very closed and very experimental world where we try to initiate payments within the metaverse. And it has, it's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of challenges as well. I mean, we are, as I mentioned, very dependent on our ecosystem and actually having a strong customer authentication, the bank ID signing. So in order to actually complete the payment, you have to remove your VR headset and actually complete the payment in the app at the moment. So there's still a lot of room for experimenting here. And yeah, so this is just from a show that I had with my colleagues, just doing the tour and actually showing how we can, in a playful and gamified way, initiate a payment, where you actually carry the coin and put them in a chest, and then you enter your phone number, and then you initiate the payment. But there is a lot of things that will happen in this environment, and I think it's super important for us to follow this trend. And as you know, it's very crypto-based at the moment. So if you want to enter one of these metaverse worlds like Decentraland or whatever, you have to have a crypto wallet. And we're not really sure that Swish will go that way, but we will definitely look on how we can use that kind of technology in ordinary payments. So you can use the blockchain technology for real-time payments as well. But let's see what the future has to say about that. So if you look even more long term, I would say that as Vitor and Russell are into here, transactions in a hybrid reality. And that's where you across everything that you see and that you guys been talking about. And you can see that a lot of this is already here. You can see that a lot of companies are exploring new technology. VR, AR, gamification, a lot of things. And in these kind of explorative worlds, it's not too much focus on transactions, But there are a lot of possibility already. And I would say that what the companies are looking mostly when you talk about metaverse and AR and gamification is a lot about education, marketing, sales, educating your new staff and everything like that. And there's also like a lot of technology, and as you said, you're experimenting with chip in Sweden, fingerprints, voice, and a lot of those initiating way of payments as well. But I would say that one of the things that came out from PSD2, the Payment Service Directive 2 that was launched, I think it was 3 years ago, 2019, which includes this strong customer authentication that you have to be compliant with in order to offer payments as a payment service provider or similar. And that is basically that you have to have 2 out of these 3 components. So for Swish, for example, we have something that you own. So we have the mobile phone together with something that you know. Either you enter your bank ID password or you have put your facial ID in the bank ID app. So that's the combination that we use. But you can choose whatever you like as long as you have at least 2 of these 2 combined. So I think experimenting on the future of payments is already definitely here. And I'm very surprised that not a lot more people are actually experimenting, especially on these factors. And what are the challenges about this? I think, first of all, it's about acceptance. And I think you were onto it as well, Vidar. And it's about creating acceptance. Like, how can you roll out these kind of new payment solutions without actually, for making it accessible for everyone. So the card networks around the world are they have great influence today, and they are worldwide. And I guess that if you go travel, that's like one of the first things that pops into your head, that, okay, if I have my Visa or MasterCard, then I will be okay. Or if I have cash, then I will be okay. But how can we create these new, how can we make sure that if you have your chip, you will be certain that it will work everywhere? So creating acceptance. And the other one is the security. How can you actually make these kind of payment solutions robust, with fraud prevention, and also scalable? And the other challenge is also authorities. And I will say, if you look especially at Europe, I would say a lot of authorities has their own agendas. For example, if you look at the European Central Bank, they are very fond of decreasing the transactional prices, so challenging the big American card networks, I would say. So they are pushing towards account-to-account payments in real time. So they have done a lot of changes to actually push towards this. And another thing that's going on is the payments investigation that's going on in Sweden right now, where they are also having their own agenda, and they're very concerned that we have to solve the offline payments as well. So I would say the challenge is to see what the authorities want as well. And then we have my time is running out here, the legacy, of course. I would say we can't really change all of the infrastructure in one day. So how can we go in step by step going toward the future of payments, and how do we mix old technology with the new, because we can't go to the step where everyone has bitcoins and then we just put away all the cards. So how do we solve that? And also the dependency within the ecosystem. As I mentioned, Swish is one ecosystem that has a lot of dependencies with the banks, with the Bankgiro, the national bank and everything. And that applies to the same with the card networks, the payment service providers. They're all very dependent on each other. And another challenge, also the consumer focus. How do we make this accessible for everyone? And how do we make it natural for everyone to choose the way that they prefer to pay without being, I'm not sure, harassed or what you said. And just a very short notice as well. I mentioned that the ECB is driving account-to-account payments in Europe, and also the PSD2 regulation has affected the payments market a lot when it comes to Europe. So by enforcing 3D Secure, which is one of the strong customer authentication for cards when it comes to online purchases, has actually dropped the conversion rate for cards, because before you could have your card saved and it was a lot easier to perform transactions. And also PSD2 with the enablement of actually innovating on banks' APIs and doing a lot of innovative services on account information and payment initiation. So I think we will see a lot more there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofia. Really interesting to hear from the real world. Yes. I have one question for you, and I think all of you should prepare to come up to the floor. But I have a question for you. What would you say is the most important consumer behavior? That is the most important trend that we actually will, in what way we will use payment methods in the future, and how are you prepared for that at Swish?
Well, I think the short-term trend that we see is the mobile as the point of sale, and I mean it's also like tokenization of cards and everything. You put everything in your phone or the device that you prefer. So I think that is the main trend and something that we will definitely focus on in the near time.
Yeah. Mm. So it will be interesting to hear, Victor. You have the chip in here. Maybe it's useless soon. Please come up now, because now we have the panel discussion.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, it's a little bit off topic, but what's the environmental implications of not having a cash-based society any longer? For example, is it more carbon intensive to pay with cash, or?
Well, it's definitely a challenge for the retailers and the physical stores not accepting. And I know that one of the things that they're looking into this payment investigation is actually should we enforce a law that says that you have to accept cash, just for inclusion and everything like that. So, and it's also like if you look to the situation in the world right now, and it's vulnerability to have everything online and not cash. I think that cash will remain in the society in some way, and maybe even increase again due to the situation in the world.
Do you know anything about the carbon differences? Is cash more carbon intensive? Is online more carbon intensive?
I'm not sure if I know the figures about that. Unfortunately, no.
Yeah. So now I say welcome to all of you. And Sofia, yes? So, okay, we had two themes today, well-being and digitalization. That's a difficult word for Swedes to say. And also payment methods. So if we combine those two, do you have any reflections?
Digitalization of payments.
Yeah, and well-being.
I was having during Victor's and Russ's presentation, I was having thoughts about the ethical issues of power and autonomy and ownership when it comes to digital payments, because who really owns the money? We see that, for example, nowadays in the world, we have the digital money, we have the experiments with digital currency, but these pilot studies say that the digital currency is more like what in France we call ticket restaurant. So it's controlled where and how you can spend this money. So as a consumer, you don't really own this money anymore. And we had cases with, for example, some civil movements having their bank accounts frozen. So how can we, it's probably an open question to everyone, as a society, as consumers, ensure that we keep owning our money, that we don't give away too much power to those who control the digital services ecosystem.
Comment on that?
Well, well-being used to be how much money do you have in the bank, and people would get up in the morning and check their smartphones to see what their bank account was that morning. I think as currency becomes more ephemeral and more tokenized and more volatile for that reason, look at what's happened to Bitcoin recently, or Ethereum for that matter, that it's going to be harder to keep track of where we're at, and it's a more fluid relationship between what we have and our well-being. And so, plus there are non-currency forms of wealth, and this is access to loans and so forth. And so it's a fluid time. How are we going to assess how we're doing based on what we have in the future, and what is what we have in the future? How do we understand that?
Mm-hmm. I actually reflected that no one of you were talking about sustainability, because that's something everybody talks about today, regardless of what you do, actually. And I also think it's because maybe to get the money to do your research, you also need to have sustainability now. It's a key word. So you had a question on carbon footprint, because how, and you also talked about Brazil a lot, because I think that the social sustainability, that's the base for sustainability in an ecological perspective. So you talked about that a little bit, but how do you think about sustainability when it comes to well-being, payment systems, and things like that?
Well, Russ and I, we have a paper discussing space tourism and Mars colonization, which is something speculative, but has to do with sustainability. Because once you start selling travels to the space and to another planet, you're saying that, well, we failed Earth. Earth actually became plan B. So there's no point in trying to fix it. Let's go to another place, and then we go to this new place, better place, heaven. So yeah, the kind of transhumanist thought has this paradox. Because at one hand, you have the ethical usage of technology to fix problems that we have here on Earth, for sure. But at the same time, we have these many big companies selling space travel. It is implied that, well, if we are going to Mars or another planet, then Earth is, well, plan B, so commodity.
Yeah. And I also think that's, you show the explosion of apps coming to, health, because I think also when the planets and the climate becomes, we almost ignore what's going on, because then you can see that people are becoming more and more focused on themselves instead, because that's something you can do when you feel that you can't do anything in a bigger perspective. So do you think that this climate changes and the everything going on with that, will that also lead to people actually will feel more focused on themselves instead?
What I'm thinking about is a cultural transition between having and being, because this whole consumerist paradigm that your well-being is what you have has been very destructive. And I'm thinking a few years back of our colleagues Caris's project, Buy Less, Be More. And I remember how it was, I think, like 7 or 8 years ago when she started it. I looked at it on Instagram, I was like, what is this? What does she mean? And now it is much more culturally acceptable to focus more on being than having, and we see the transition from consumerism towards experiences, towards more sustainable consumption, having less stuff and working more inwards, and probably that's one of the ways towards more sustainability.
Sophia?
Well, I was reflecting upon that we're still talking about these technological transitions almost in a compulsive way, that they will happen, they must happen. You were talking about how are we going to get this accepted? You were talking about how is it going to be stable? As if it has to happen. And talking about social and cultural sustainability for the future doesn't mean that technology and transhumanism has to go further. But that is a more ethical and philosophical reflection that I think we fall into that all the time, that we don't see another. It's like a modern I mean not postmodern and not post-postmodern. It's a modern thought, a progressive linear thought that we have to go that way. We have to colonize, we have to grow. And I wish we could have another perspective sometimes, that this technology doesn't have to be the solution or be what we have to follow.
I think one thought, and especially when it comes to your question, is that it comes to the perception of what is sustainable as well. If you look at Swish as a brand, we were the #1 most sustainable brand when it comes to asking the Swedish population, what brand do you think is the most sustainable? But we're actually, like, if you compare, it's hard to measure as well, like cash against account-to-account transactions. So I think it's a hard way, and it's a lot about perception, like how do you feel? What do you feel is most sustainable and stuff like that. So I think that's super interesting.
I have a question for Victor and Russell. So I'm quite old, so I can't say. So there's a lot of research showing that consumers don't trust retailers' data collection habits, but that we continue to use their services because of the convenience offered. Presuming this trend continues into biohacking, how will we feel having something we don't trust inside of us? And how will that affect our well-being?
Let me consult my crystal ball here.
Yes.
Well, if you don't trust something, why would you have that something inside of you? That's the first question. Because getting back to the philosophy behind transhumanism, you're going to find morphological freedom. You are free to do whatever you want, including not having anything. So why would you have something inside of you that you don't trust? You have the right to keep it, without anything. That's
but maybe
the main question.
If you don't have a choice, when it becomes like
mandatory
business, that it's mandatory because that's the way you're supposed to pay, or
mandatory
like accessible, like you have
like
to
internet,
have it, like
you have to have, or mandatory,
yeah.
like a government saying, well, you have to be implanted.
Or maybe more is to live an everyday life. You need to have that because it's the way to pay. Yeah.
I mean, we're so anxious to trade off our privacy for the convenience of the app that we've downloaded. There was a study recently where, the EULAs, the end user license agreements that go on, or the terms of service that we sign. This one was experimenting with a new app, and people would sign off on these same sorts of things. And they didn't read the small print. 98% agreed to this without reading any of it. And what they were doing was giving away their data to the National Security Agency and promising their firstborn child. And so if we're willing to give up that, whether it's inside of us or outside of us, as long as there's these external forces that are gathering our data in exchange for the convenience they're providing us, I think we'll continue to fool ourselves in that way.
And I think that's a paradox, isn't it? Being a human being, because you don't feel trust, but still you just click in the box because you don't read the agreement. So, especially in countries where you have low literacy when it comes to right. So coming from Brazil, once again, the idea of technology, the idea of sustainability, it's completely different. Completely different. Yes.
If you think about if you ask a poor person, what do you think about sustainability? You're probably going to listen to some stories about surviving. That's much more about carbon, because that person doesn't understand, has this kind of literacy, this kind of knowledge. But it's important to contribute somehow, right? But once again, it's contextual related for sure.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Yeah. This brings me back to, I think it's a very well-known book, Professor Shoshana Zuboff and her magnum opus, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, where she talks specifically about this, that now us and our behavioral data are the product that is being traded between the companies that provide all these apps and social networks, and that we are not the product anymore, we are the raw materials from which the product, which is our behavioral data, is being extracted. And what she claims is that this is the new business model for the next century. So I think what's important to think about is as consumers, do we embrace this surveillance capitalism, or do we find ways to resist it? And if
Do we understand it?
Do we
That's something
understand it? Yes.
before. Do we understand it? Because if you are on a platform and you don't pay for it, you are the product.
Yes.
But then, do you understand the mechanism behind it?
Exactly. And how many people are even trying to understand this? This is a
it's
question.
more.
And what are the algorithms doing?
Yes.
Exactly.
And that's where, when I showed my little ugly model on the conflict market, what is sold there is the consumer engagement, which is either the consumer ad spaces because of the consumer engagement or the data of the consumers. But what really makes that engagement poof is the conflict.
Zizek lenses, the glasses.
I'm sorry?
The movie about Zizek and the glasses. That you have to change your glasses to see the world.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
I have a question for Sofia now. How can marketers, retailers fight the conflict market? For instance, negative aspects it may involve for young people.
Well, that's interesting, because then I would probably go back to move again with how do we do it in not an antagonistic way, but in an agonistic way. And that's, of course, something that one needs to reflect upon oneself as a company. I think Oatly, for example, has formed their whole ontology on exactly antagonism. And that's not so uncommon today. So that would probably be my my first suggestion, not to go that way.
Interesting comment from you? No? Okay, I have another question, then I will lean to the audience. I think it's really interesting, this, focus on technology and the development, like you also talked about, Sofia. And we have these ideas about metaverse and second life and all this, that it's going to totally change the human being or the world we live in. And it's always like the how people live their everyday life and social norms is so slow to change. It's really like, so we have seen it over and over again with technology that it doesn't, the things that we are fantasizing about is not happening. Because I think it's interesting, because you talked about using the phone instead of maybe they thought this would be the smartest thing, and then you look at human behavior instead. How will they interact with technology? And then you can see that maybe, no, it's not the chip, maybe it will be the phone all the time. So how do you reflect on that, this idea of technology, and how we as humans actually don't do as we think that we will use technology? It's an easy question.
I think that it's super. I mean, you can never really look into the what did you say? The miracle. Yeah, exactly. The crystal ball to predict and see what's going to happen. But I think, like, when you talk about the chips and the NFC and the functionality that is within the chips, they're also available within the phone. And I think, we look a lot at what's happening in China, because they have done something that we call frog leaping. So they were like a kind of like after in when it comes to technology. And then all of a sudden everyone had a phone in their hands. So they skipped all of these, like having cards available, having terminals, and all of a sudden everyone can do everything with their phones. So they skipped the legacy that we have with payment terminals and like in the middle technologies. So I think that's like in these kind of economies that we have to follow the trends to see what's more natural with the new.
I think our ideas of the future of technology are very limited by the technology we currently have, because I'm thinking of these illustrations from end of 19th, early 20th century, that they imagined that people 100 years from now will fly all around in this like balloons, And then remember the movies Back to the Future, where we had this like flying skateboards.
Hoverboard.
So hoverboards, exactly. So at any point in time, we as humanity imagine the future as, let's say, a generation of humans possessing whatever technology we have now, but more improved. But we don't know what's coming. Maybe it's something completely different.
But I will also reflect on your this idea of the future of technology, because also when you look at those images and films. You still see maybe the woman coming with a drink to the man, and you have the social norms. It's really like so difficult to predict because it's really like, but the technology is quite more easy to predict. So do you have any more on technology?
Yeah, we already had some comments on against technological determinism, but right now what's hampering the metaverse is partly the goggles, the huge Oculus Rift sort of things, which during COVID-19, rather than buying new outfits of clothing, you could buy a digital self clothing, and it was 3D and would move with you and so forth, because we were all just talking heads. In the future, theoretically, we could buy our clothes to wear out on the street digitally, but everyone would have to be going down the street with these Oculus Rift. Otherwise, the emperor has no clothes, and we can just see the person. And that sort of betting on a future development, and Google is working on a new Google Glass, and so is Amazon and other Apple and so forth. Betting on technology is never a good thing. That's the flying cars, once again, that we don't see so much these days. And so, not flying cars, flying balloons, I'm sorry, in your case. So, and I think the metaverse is going to be a big bust for that reason. It's betting on these new technologies, and I don't think we should do that in this case. It's a nice thing to imagine, but it's not going to happen.
So maybe we have just got used to wearing the protection for the mouth and the nose, and just looking at people's eyes. So now the difference will be we will only see the nose and the mouth, and
still the facial recognition is able to do it.
Yeah. So,
but I just have to comment, because I think it's kind of you can't really see the metaverse just connected to virtual reality and the goggles. I think that we will see like a hybrid of everything. So connecting like AR instead or something else. So I'm not sure that the VR is
not this model actually. They're gonna have to be. They must be much more transparent.
Yeah.
The idea of transparent technology. They are not actually. So if they get to the point, creating some sort of transparent technology that blends perfectly, then perhaps. Because right now I have to stop, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to connect here. There's a ritual, and that's not useful or nice to do. So if you have a transparent technology, perhaps you can live your life and things can happen, probably. There's a nice author that discusses that, Amber Case. She's from the US. It's a nice way to see technology.
She's a virtual anthropologist, I think.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Exciting. So yes, just wait for the microphone.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if this microphone is working, but I was thinking maybe we should talk a little bit more about sustainability. I heard that you tried, but also about degrowth. And in Sweden we have a very high second-hand index when it comes to consumption, social shopping. And I think it's interesting also when we talk about technology that the Swish is really a revolution here in Sweden when it comes to the second-hand physical market. I mean, you can see those people, they are not so digital, they are very old, but everyone has this Swish card and they click and you see all the stars falling out. And I mean, that's really a nice experience to see how this also promote sustainable consumption and also a traditional way of shopping. So, I mean, when we talk about technology, we have to talk about different spaces here also, and of course different practices. So just to put focus on technology could be many different things, as you have shown. But this very mundane, everyday, slow shopping, I mean, we are also very some people in Sweden, they are really into shop-stop movements, as you know. So that was just a reflection about the very nice Swish revolution here.
Yeah, I'm happy that you mentioned. I think that roughly 90% of the second-hand market is done by Swish payments. So it's,
Wow.
yeah.
So, any other question? Yes? Yes, wait for the microphone. Down here?
Down here.
So my question is, we have already spoken about the need basis, the need of the biohumanism. So now I would like to know from you that there's a trend also, consumer trend, early adapters. So when they follow something, how you see to it? Because if there's something happening, if a chip inside your body, there will be huge mass, new generation, they will follow it. It's not need based. It's just, looking cool, or some trend is going on and they will just follow it. How do you see this transformation if that market takes place? Then what is the future you see?
No, the future is tough to predict, but I get your question. Russ has a nice paper, a book chapter, I think, on coolness, the meanings of cool, right? And what is cool today might be cool tomorrow or not. So AirPods today are are cool, but tomorrow not so much. Microchips, they are not really well known today, but tomorrow may become. And then comes the question, should a teenager, can this teenager go there to a piercing studio, tattoo studio, and just get one? Is there regulation allowing or not that teenager to do that? What is the purpose of doing that? So imagine that this teenager has one implanted, and by accident, this microchip has a virus, and by accident, someone tapped on the smartphone, and then the smartphone gets a virus, and then I'm saying, very apocalyptic scenario, but extreme. But all right, true. Let's say that's true. How can you deal with that? Whose fault actually is it? The body modifier, parents, teenager, friend? I don't know.
Sophia?
Yeah,
No, go ahead. No, first.
Because I was thinking about that, and then you mentioned it, that face recognition, for example, is actually not inside. If we take that old dichotomy of inside, outside, external, internal, it's not internal, but it's still your body. So it is a kind of transhuman technology, right?
You can use an Instagram filter that will
exactly.
You can transform yourself.
Yeah, and isn't that the future? I'm thinking, instead of having to do surgery and put stuff inside your body,
There's
actually
a movement
that your
now
body is your
the body. Actually, we are conceptualizing a new paper that says that the body is a site for design. Right. So the main idea is that you're going to change physically based on what you want, based on what you saw on Instagram, for instance. So there are many teenagers looking for plastic surgery to have their faces exactly like the future. So it's something that will be here.
But maybe it will be a problem because all young women want to look the same if you're using. So when they are,
will be really boring.
Yes. So
but there's
at the time, yes, Russell, do you have a comment?
There's a counter to that. What's cool is not what everyone is doing, but it's sort of a unique subculture, and so there's a anti-technology movement, and so to have retro things like a vinyl record player or film cameras and so forth,
coins,
is more cool than what everyone is doing, and so there's every action has an opposite reaction, whatever that physiological principle is.
I think the time is running out, and I would like you all to say just 3 to 5 words about future consumption. What will it look like?
Oh wow! In the short term or long term?
Short.
Okay, so I'm still going to keep talking about the mobile as the point of sale, and I think that everything that we do will be more or less connected to the phone. So you will basically be able to handle everything in your everyday life through the phone.
Victor?
Because we are working on a kind of a theoretical framework now that is called inactivism, I think the future, or the short term actually, will be a revision, or I don't know, a new conceptualization about mind, body, and environment, and the relation that we have with these elements or actors, based on technological affordances or constraints.
I'm thinking back to the theoretical value configuration space model with this structure and agency that we have briefly discussed earlier this morning. And what I just want to say is that anything is possible, but any kind of service practice, when it reaches a critical mass with the early adopters, becomes a normalized social practice. And this is where, at this point, it gets fine-tuned and regulated. So hopefully, with our technological advancement, we will get to also a certain kind of, let's say, ethical rules of play with whatever practices we engage in, be it digital mental health consumption, be it the transhumanism and implants or mobile payments, that we manage to do it, let's say, with the greater care for consumers and societies.
Well, there was a great hope with COVID-19 that this was a hinge in history, that things are going to be different now, that we're really going to take climate change seriously, that we're going to take basic income for everyone as being a universal sort of principle, that we're going to fight capitalism and find alternative systems that are kinder to people. And all of these things, look at us now, we're back in person at a conference, and we're flying, and we're not paying attention to these forecasts. So I'm afraid the new normal is going to be a lot like the old normal. And this hope of great change is sort of dissipating. And again, there are have and have not countries that have experienced COVID differently. And Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is still hurting. So the new normal is going to be the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, I'm afraid.
Sophia?
Well, perhaps more political for a while, antagonistically, but hopefully more agonistic in the future. But it is more and more political, more and more complex, and because its consumption is so immersed in, suffused in algorithmic culture, it will become more and more algorithmically distorted. I totally believe in that for a long time, and therefore less transparent for us to understand. Very complex and very important for us researchers to explore.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
It was a really nice discussion, and now we are over time, and I just want to say a final word about this morning. I think it's been a really interesting morning. Lots of hopes and not hopes, maybe. And I think it's really interesting to think of the future of consumption in those different perspectives. And I think, Emma, that it will be a book. Yes, so this will be a book later on. So if you're interested, keep an eye on that. I think you will actually Instagram it and Facebook it, and all the social media things when it's coming up. So I would like to thank you all for being here, and I hope you enjoyed this morning as much as I did. So thank you.